Well, this is Brent. Thank you, Miss Francine. This is Brent. Brent Allen Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com. Coming to you, coming at you. Here we are from the remote hinterlands of the Wabash River Valley, where the hogs, the frogs, and the dogs keep up a racket all night long. Oh, okay, here we go. Yeah, we're doing it to it here this morning. Get this thing upside down. This is the Catechism, as I'd said. Arthur J. Stansbury, Catechism on the Constitution of the United States. Question 229, where we left off out of 333 questions. Question 229 says this: are the duties of these officers called heads of departments? Today we'd call those cabinet members. And remember, constitutionally, there are not as many as there that are used now. For example, the Department of Education is not part of our Constitution of the United States at the national level. Therefore, Trump has echoed his sentiments, saying he wants to get rid of it. A good thing. Federal government in Washington, D.C. has no authority to do anything, say anything, provide any money for education in America. That's a state matter. By analogy, consider what recently happened not too long ago when the Supreme Court of the United States says we are doing away with the decision Roe v. Wade. We're overturning it. Why did they do that? Did they do that because they wanted to change it? No, they didn't want to change it. They just said the general government in Washington, D.C. has no jurisdiction over that. We're disavowing that we ever should have made the decision in the first place. You understand what I'm saying? And they threw it back where it belongs, to each of the states. They didn't outlaw abortion. No. They didn't say abortion is unconstitutional. No, they just said this isn't a matter for the Supreme Court of the United States. If our Constitution of the United States had mentioned it and said it was a matter for the Supreme Court, then we'd have jurisdiction to take such a case, but we don't have jurisdiction. So we're overturning it and we're giving it back to the states for them to make the decision concerning abortion. Well, same thing with the Department of Education. The general government in Washington, D.C. has no authority, according to our Constitution of the United States, to say anything about education, to put forth and promulgate any regulations, to make any policy. They have no authority. That means they just need to shut up and not talk about it anymore. By analogy, again, same thing's true of religion. What does the First Amendment say? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And what does that mean? That means that they're not to say anything about it one way or the other. Just leave it alone. None of your business. That's the way education is. That's the way abortion is. When I ran for office, of course, I'm against abortion. I get it, right? I'm against it. But when people would ask me about it, and this is back, my answer was just as the Supreme Court said 30 years later, recently. I don't want to comment about it. None of my business. I'm running for Congress. I'm not running for the State House. If I were running for the State House, that would be an important question you could ask me. But you're asking me questions over which I have no jurisdiction as a congressman. Education, health, there's another one. Yeah, COVID, all that stuff. No, the general government has no jurisdiction over that. Does the general government in Washington, D.C. have authority to maintain a Surgeon General of the United States? I don't see that in the Constitution anywhere. Do you? All these czars, they call them. No. Department of this and Department of that. No, we have a Department of Justice, a Department of War, a Department of State. Those are the departments that our government, well, they're just necessary evils. We got to have them. But beyond that, what does our Constitution give us authority to allow in the general government in Washington, D.C.? You say, Brent, you're a voice crying in the wilderness. Nobody's listening. Well, that's not my concern. My concern is to say the truth. I'm talking to the cubic foot air in front of my face. Now, some of you are asking, why is Brent's camera so far up in the air? And that's a valid question. I'll tell you why. Because I'm traveling, and I had no place to mount my camera. And the only thing I could mount it on is a lamp stand, and there we go. I had no background. You notice I made one back here so you could see my head. If my head's up against a white wall, which the whole room is, you couldn't see where my head started and stopped very well, because my hair isn't the same color it used to be. And no, it's not chemically dependent either. That's just natural, I suppose, when you get older. Well, Catechism 229. Are the duties of these officers declared by the Constitution? The officers. Now, he's talking about the Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of War, and Secretary of the Navy. Read that again. This is constitutional. I have 4 cabinet members. Secretary of State under the President of the United States. Secretary of the Treasury, you got to have that. Got to have Secretary of State to deal with other countries. That's called foreign policy. Secretary of the Treasury. Well, you got to have somebody to keep track of the money that comes into the government. Secretary of War, National Defense is subject for the general government in Washington, D.C., yes. And Secretary of the Navy. You say, well, why isn't Secretary of War under the Secretary of the Navy? Why isn't that all the same? 2 different things. Secretary of War, there's a fellow, see, a Secretary of War. We call it today the Department of Defense, but really it should be called Secretary of War. Why? Because when war is declared, the nation has traditionally had to tool up for war. World War II, we didn't have anything. We should have had something. Said yesterday, I laid World War II and all the millions of deaths at the feet of Franklin Roosevelt. He's the one that made it happen. How did he make it happen? By stripping the military of arms and men, making us look weak. So what did the Japs do? They said, these guys are a bunch of panty waste. All they do is go to movies and drive fancy cars. Was that true? Yeah, that was true. That was true. During the Depression, they called it the Depression. That was very much manufactured as well. They called it the Depression, but did you know that the movie business thrived? The movie houses were full. The liquor business thrived. The clothing business thrived. Dresses for women, suits for men, all that thrived. People spent their money on luxury. You say, why? Because that's what people like to do, and you tell them that we're in a depression, whether we are or not, that's what they're going to do. They're going to loaf and pry the poor mouth and talk about how much of a victim they are of economic circumstances. It's a mania, friends. The Japs knew better. They said, well, they're driving pretty cars and they're making nice cars and the roads are filled with nice cars and they're going to movie houses. They're distracted and preoccupied with movie stars and movie magazines and movies. That's what they said. You can go back and read what they said, why they attacked. Americans are panty waste. We're tough. We're militaristic. We're tooled up for war. We're fighting war. We're winning. We're conquering Asia. We've conquered the whole Pacific, and we want them out of Hawaii, and then we're going to go on to San Francisco. That's what they said. Why? And then why were all those untold numbers of Americans killed? Because of Roosevelt, making us look weak, promoting his political policies for the Depression. We're all victims. We're all down. We can't get up. Blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, we were up and whooped their pants off. We did that, but there was no need for it. There seldom ever is. Well, the duties of these officers, Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of the War, just four. That's all there is. These and no others, these and no more. Well, what about the Department of Education? No, we said that's not in the Constitution. What about the Department of Housing and Urban Development? Is that in the Constitution? No, that's not in the Constitution. Department of Urban Development. Who wants to develop urban stuff? That's our problem. We've got too much urbane things going on. Our cities are too big. That's why people are fleeing the cities as I speak. Talked to a woman last night in an elevator. Had two boys with her. Young lady with two boys about 10, 12 years old. I said, "Where's your husband?" She said, well, I talked to the boys first, and I said, "Where's your husband?" She said, "He's taking care of the farm." I said, "Farm? You don't look like a hayseed." I know a hayseed when I see one. You're looking at one. I got hayseed in my hair. Seems like it's always there. I got straw in my pocket, so I was just trying to dig it out the other day, my coat pocket. Anyway, I said, "Where's your hubby?" And she said, "He's back watching the farm." I said, "What's he got to do?" He said, "He's got to do the feeding." I said, "Do the feeding? I know what that is. What do you got?" "Oh, got some cattle, goats, chickens." I said, "Where do you live?" "Central Oregon." Come to find out, they had to learn how to do all that. They moved to the country and started farming, trying to raise livestock, trying to figure out how to make money. You wouldn't believe how many people I meet that are trying to do that, fleeing from the cities. Good thing, Department of Urban Development. I was in front of the a body of authority for grilling me about my practice of law, trying to find something I'd done wrong. As it turned out, I was exonerated. You know, if you do things that are lawful, but they aren't the accepted thing, people think you're doing something wrong. Case in point, when we started teaching our children at home, we didn't send them to school anywhere. We just kept them at home, school them there. When we did that, people came out of the woodwork to try to stop us, beginning with family and then friends. They'd corner us and read us the riot act and tell us we were destroying our children. I mean, heartfelt pleas from family at first, and then from your friends. And then if that doesn't work, then here comes the government after you. And we'd point out to them, no, this is lawful. Here's the law on the matter. It's clear as crystal. They can't see it. Why? Because public opinion and the mania of political correctness had overcome their minds. So they keep coming. They keep coming. They keep coming. All you're doing is minding your own business and trying to teach the Bible to your children. Isn't that something? I knew people that had it rougher than us by far. We just had hassles. But it was bad enough. You're trying to do a job and people won't leave you alone. Well, are these duties of these officers declared by the Constitution? Why do people, and I like this guy, but it is a blight on us that people write in the passive mood. Are the duties of these officers declared by the Constitution? Why wouldn't he just say, does the Constitution declare the duties of these officers? See that, then you eliminate a couple of words, make it cleaner, but that's not what they do. Now, some of you are out there saying, what do you mean passive? Well, get out your bonehead grammar book from 8th grade or look it up on the internet. It's there, and say, what is the passive mood? Once you see it, you'll go, oh yeah, I know what that is. Well, are the duties declared by, does the Constitution declare these duties? No, but by law of Congress. Congress declares these duties. They are, however, persons of great importance in our government. Who's that? Well, the Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of War, and the Secretary of the Navy. A while ago, I said there's a difference between the Secretary of War and the Secretary of the Navy. Why? Because the Secretary of War, when war is declared, the Secretary of War has to tool up. That's a different task than the Secretary of the Navy. Why? Because the Navy is already tooled up. That's why. Navy's ready. The Navy's ever ready. The Navy has always been ready. The Navy is at sea, armed, loaded, and locked. If the Navy's not at sea, armed, loaded, and locked, there's no sense spending money on ships. No, the Navy is always ready because the commerce across the oceans on the high seas never stops. So our Navy is always there. It takes a long time to tool up a Navy. You got to build ships. You got to man them. That takes a long time. So America has traditionally kept tooled up with her Navy, as all other maritime nations have and do. I think I told you this story. There's a difference between the Secretary of War. They got to tool up. They got to raise an army. You remember how, well, don't remember if you read history. In World War I and World War II, we had to tool up. We had no army to mount anything in either case. We needed a few million men. We needed to have them uniformed and trained fast. It took an effort and time. I think I told you my brother was in London. He worked out of the Eisenhower building downtown, named after the American General Eisenhower. When Desert Storm began, he was on the staff of some big muckety muck. They call them admirals and generals and stuff like that. And he was on the staff with this admiral. And the big shots from Washington, D.C. got them all together, and they're in London, and the people from Europe are military over there and around the world that were close by and around the world. And the boss man under the President of the United States said to the man in charge of the Army, are you ready? How much time you need? Now, my brother he witnessed this. So he told, I'm giving you this on the testimony of my older brother. And he said, how much time you need? He said, well, I'd like to have 3 months. Well, I had to tool up, had to get things ready, had to ship things to different parts of the world. Then he said to the fellow that was in charge of the Navy, he said, how much time do you need? He said, I don't need any. I'm ready. My ships are at sea. My boys are trained. My ships are manned. They're loaded with ammo, airplanes, artillery, not artillery, but gunnery. They call it artillery when it's on land. My Marines are aboard the ships, the troop ships. They could be wherever they had to be within a matter of 48 hours. You know, you take a ship running 12 knots. Well, just figure it to miles an hour. That's close, but that's not the same. But if you run a ship 24 hours a day at 10 knots, well, that's 240 miles right there. You can get a lot of places fast because the ship runs night and day, see, and it just keeps moving, not real fast. Of course, on a high-speed run, they get those troops there double that time. They'll run over 25 knots. They'll fire up the boilers till the ship just shudders, the whole thing. They'll get them there. My airplanes off my carriers can strike anywhere in the world upon command. He was all ready, is the point I'm making. Well, that's the point here, too. In that sense, the difference between the Army and the Navy hasn't changed. They're two different services, two different cultures entirely. Entirely two different cultures that have grown over centuries into what they are, and that's not going to change. Two different ways of looking at life. The Army in our country, by the way, is senior to the Navy because it was formed first. Just a little side note here. When the Army, they had during World War II and thereafter, they had M1s, single shot lever action rifles. Then they got the M14. Well, the Navy had M1s too. They were all trained the same rifles. But then when the Army got the M14, all their excess M1s, they just gave them all to the Marine Corps and the Navy. The Marine Corps is the Navy. I know it's a branch of the Navy, but it's all Navy. And then when the Army got the M16, they took all their M14s and they gave them to the Navy and the Marine Corps. So now the Marine Corps has got M14s and the Army's got M16s. And then when the M16A1 came out, the Army gave all their M16s to the Navy and the Marine Corps, and they got M16A1s. Now, after that, I've lost track because I wasn't around, but they've got some fancy rifles now that I look at them like, what in the world is that? But the point I'm making is because the Army is senior over the Navy, because it was formed first, then they get all the new stuff first, and they give the old stuff, the hand-me-downs, to the Navy. That's true. That's always been that way. A little known fact. I saw it happen. Well, law of Congress. The duties of these officers declared by the Constitution? No, but by law of Congress. So, Constitution of the United States gives authority to Congress to declare what their duties are. They are, however, of great importance, these officers: Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of War, Secretary of the Navy. I'm not repeating that for fun. I want to repeat it often just so it drives it home into our minds. There are only four. The government in Washington, D.C. has no authority given to it outside the four corners of the Constitution of the United States. The Four Corners Doctrine. The Four Corners Doctrine. Don't forget that. It's a principle of contract law that says if you've got a written contract, everything within the four corners are the terms of the contract and nothing else can be added. But I thought we agreed, blah, blah. No. You got a written contract? No, within the four corners. And you interpret every phrase and every word to show its consistency within the four corners of the document of legal significance, such as our Constitution of the United States. What does regulate mean when our Constitution says that a well-regulated militia be necessary to the security of a free state? When our Constitution says that Congress has the power to regulate commerce between the states with the Indian tribes and foreign nations, what does that mean, regulate? Well, when you go to courts, or any of us go to say, well, what does that mean? We make sure that the meaning of that word is consistent with everything within the four corners of that document called our Constitution of the United States. That's a principle of a common law principle of interpretations of writings of legal significance, contracts, trust indentures, our Constitution of the United States, legislation, regulations. The principle is always the same within the four corners. We call it the four corners rule. Four corners. You might remember that one. The Secretary of State attends to everything which concerns our affairs with other nations. Remember, there are only four: Secretary of State, Secretary of War, Secretary of Navy, and Secretary of the Treasury. The Secretary of State handles all things which concern our affairs with other nations. And also to those of the general government with the governments of the different states of the United States. You see that? The Secretary of State handles all affairs with other nations in relation to the United States, and he also handles all affairs with the United States government and the governments of the individual states of the United States. Why? Because the governments of the individual states of the United States are sovereign governments. He also handles all affairs with the Indian tribes because they are also sovereign governments. I don't think he says that here. I just throw that in because the Constitution says that. The Indian tribes are foreign governments of sovereignty. The states are foreign governments of sovereignty to the United States in one sense, yes. And the countries around the world are foreign governments with relation to the United States. To draw these boundaries in one's mind is indispensable to what we call United States constitutional government. And it's a common law doctrine that local authority be sovereign. How sovereign? Well, we'll talk about that. That is a doctrine that lawyers have come to call federalism, the relationship between the states of the United States among each other. They each have a relationship with each other and also with the general government in Washington, D.C. Remember, our Constitution of the United States forbids the governments of the states of the United States making treaties and pacts. No, they're independent of each other. They're not even allowed to make deals with each other. See, that's what happened when they had that horrible war. That horrible war where the states, the southern tiers of the states, formed a confederacy. And people in the South and all over the country said, you can't do that. The Constitution of the United States says you can't do that. That's unconstitutional for you to form a confederacy, a league, a bond, a treaty, an agreement, and go to war with anybody. You can't do that and go to war with Bolivia, France. No, you can't do that. The Constitution says you can't do that, and much less form a confederacy and go to war with other states of the United States. You know what they said? They said, well, we didn't form the Confederacy when we were part of the United States. We left the United States, then formed the Confederacy. Therefore, it's okay. That's what they said. And then the deleterious material hit the fan. Deleterious material. That's an euphemism for, well, I won't say it. That's a euphemism. I borrowed that phrase from legislation that Brother Al Gore, Vice President of the United States, former senator from Tennessee, a law he pushed through Congress has the words deleterious material. It means sewage. A catch-all term. But that stuff hit the fan, see? Then what do? People die. Bad scene. I don't mean a little bit either. I mean, a lot of people die. In that case, almost 700,000 Americans slaughtered by Americans. Americans slaughtered almost 700,000 Americans. The older I get, the more I grasp and understand the monumentous character of that awful, awful event that occurred. And I had family involved in it. Family, quite a few, from the South, from the South. My family's from the South. And they joined the Union Army. What does that tell you? And they weren't the only ones. Anytime during that war, about 20,000 Kentuckians were under arms in the Union Army. And that many Tennesseans, by the way, and other people scattered around the South. Why isn't that talked about? That's what made it so vicious and ugly. Families were split apart entirely. And no good came of it. Only evil. Much more to be said about it. Well, Secretary of War manages the business of the Army, and the Secretary of the Navy, that which concerns our vessels of war. Secretary of the Treasury attends to all that concerns the money of the United States. All of these officers are under the control of the President of the United States. He may require their opinion in writing on any subject that belongs to their different departments, but he is not bound by it. He may also dismiss them from office. Oh, that we would understand the simplicity of the flow of authority. Everything would change. The simplicity of the flow of authority as God has commanded it. Is the Constitution of the United States the Bible? No, no. But does it track biblical principles? Yes. It is a brief of common law government. Let me flesh this out a little bit concerning the flow of authority. As an example, the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States, not only is he to keep track of all the money of the United States, he is also in charge of collecting all tariffs and duties. Duties? It's a duty to pay taxes. That's why they're called duties. No. It's not a debt. It's a duty. That means duties arise under law, debts arise under contract. If you've listened to me very long, some of you have even said this, you just keep saying the same things over and over again. That's right. That's right. That's right. What do I say over and over again? I don't want you to miss it. And for those that come in that are new, I want them to hear it over and over again, because the Bible says we learn line upon line, precept by precept, here a little, there a little. Just keep saying the same fundamental things over and over and over and over and over. Debt arises out of contract. That's a private matter. You're dealing with the government. That's not a private matter. If it's lawful, what the government's saying, taxes, if they're lawful, that's not a debt. That's a duty. What do duties arise out of? Law. That's why we call taxes duties. That's a synonym for taxes. Our Constitution of the United States calls them duties. Tariffs, taxes. Who's in charge of collecting those? The Department of the Treasury. The Secretary of the Treasury. Who is in charge of the Secretary of the Treasury? The President of the United States. He appoints him and he controls him. He has authority to trump, no pun intended, to trump anything the Secretary of the Treasury tries to do, to stop him, to direct him by executive order. Executive order. When the President of the United States orders any of these departments what to do, or our military, that through these departments, what to do, those are executive orders. Executive orders are orders to those that work under these departments of government that President Trump gives to one of these four departments: Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of War, Secretary of Treasury, and Secretary of State. He gives an order to one of those four, and they carry it out. You know, we've never seen this before. Some of you have seen it. President Trump televising cabinet meetings. There are a lot of people in those meetings. Go watch them. You can see them on YouTube. There are a lot of people in those meetings that shouldn't be there. Like who? Well, anybody that isn't Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of War, or Secretary of the Navy. Just take all the rest of them and throw them out and say, you folks are out of a job. All you 2 million or however, there are a few million people work for the government. Secretary of Education, Housing, Urban Development, Health. Health? Remember, the police powers of the states are health, education, and welfare. The general government in Washington, D.C. has no authority over health, education, and welfare. So what are they known for? Passing out food stamps, delivering welfare. No, no, no. Well, I don't know. You say, Brent, you don't know what you're talking about. I think I do. I wouldn't be so animated about it. Animated, yeah. Animated. That means moving. It moves my soul to think about what God has said he wants in government, what the duties of government are, and government then tries to be total and take over everything in the country. The general government from Washington, D.C. has no authority over health, COVID. Why were the general government talking about COVID? They have no authority there. No authority to appoint a Surgeon General of the United States. Education, no authority to appoint a Department of Education. And welfare, no authority to distribute welfare. Our Constitution of the United States gives health, education, and welfare jurisdiction to who? Each of the states individually. Where does abortion lie in there? Is that a matter of health, education? Well, yes, it's a matter of health. Murdering babies is a matter of health. That's the police powers of the states. The states have authority to say no, can't do that. You do it, we'll send you to the penitentiary for a long time, Mr. Medical Doctor. They have authority to say that. The general government in Washington, D.C. has no authority to say that. Health, education, and welfare under our what we call federalism are given to the states. The only authority the general government in Washington, D.C. has over health, education, and welfare is on a military base. Oh, yeah, there. In the 10 square miles called District of Columbia. Yeah, there. Maybe a federal courthouse. Yeah, there. No place else. No place else. Well, what about national parks? What about Jellystone National Park? That's questionable at best. They're doing it. I doubt it. I don't see that in the Constitution. That's a matter of state law within the states, even though, watch me, even though the general government in Washington, D.C. may claim to own title to federal land, such as the BLM land, Bureau of Land Management, national parks, all that stuff, state law applies. I know on mining claims it's that way. If you got a problem on federal land, BLM land, and somebody's jumping your claims, and you've got a title right to title to mining claims, where do you take that suit? Where? You take it to state court. You don't take it to federal court. Why? Because it's a property right question. That has to do with the states. A contract question has to do with the states. It's within the boundary of the states. You're having a contract problem, a title problem of the land. Those lines forever are blurred in the general government in Washington, D.C. What do you expect? If the general government in Washington, D.C. takes more taxes from people than the state where they live, we got a problem. And that's been going on for decades. Who's going to have the power? Who's going to have all the money? The golden rule, you've heard it. The golden rule. Whoever has the gold makes the rules. It's true. Shouldn't be true, but it is in an evil world. And then the government takes the money and taxes and then hands it out to the states to get them to do what they want. Well, if you don't know what we say, we're not giving you any money. Fine. We'll figure it out ourselves, but we're not paying any more of your federal taxes. If the state said that, it would be helpful. There's more to it than that. What I'm doing is pointing out what the Constitution of the United States says and what it means by what it says, what it was intended to say. We're far afield from that now, far afield. But let's talk about, we must have something to aspire to make things better. All of these officers are under the control of the president. What officers? Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of War, and Secretary of the Navy. All of them are under authority, absolute authority of the President of the United States. Watch what happens. When people start complaining about taxes, what does the president usually say? I'm not saying Trump says this, but I'm in my lifetime, what do presidents say? It's those darned IRS agents. Those are evil. The IRS is evil. It's evil. Well, who's in charge of the IRS? The President of the United States. He could give an order to the Secretary of the Treasury and say, I don't want you to collect any more taxes. As a matter of fact, watch this, talking about Trump, something that's in the news. Prosecutions for tax crimes, so-called crimes, dropped to almost zero during Trump's first term in office. Why? Because the Justice Department, as it's called, his Attorney General of the United States, he just gave him an order to stand down, forget about it. Let's just try to collect taxes and quit fighting people and sending them to jail. If we want their money, we'll just take their property. Did you know that, now, I haven't checked in the last 20 years, but back in the 90s when I was running for office, I knew that we were the only government in the world that threw people in jail for not paying taxes. The only government. Well, what do other governments do? Well, you don't pay your taxes. They just confiscate your house or your land or your automobile. They just take your stuff, but they don't throw your carcass in jail. That'd be stupid. Then you can't pay taxes anymore. Your family's abandoned. We just took everything you got because you owed us taxes. Now you need to make a living so your children can have beans and wieners on the table. And if we throw you in jail, then we got to make welfare payments to your wife, and they don't do that. Here, they're out to destroy families, take your Second Amendment rights so you can't have a gun, on and on the madness goes. Where she stops, nobody knows. Did you know the government of the United States, back then, I assume it's pretty much still the same, is the only one that says if you haven't paid your taxes and you live in another country, we're coming at you we're coming after you in the other country, and we're going to throw you in jail if we don't like the way you're dealing with your tax duties. In other words, all the other countries in the world, pretty much their authority to tax stops at the 12-mile nautical limit of the ocean around their country or at their borders. You have something in another country, they're not concerned. We want right here. Yeah. In other words, it's just out of hand. It's not according to our common law tradition. If taxes can be lawful, and if they are, they're to be taken care of course. Congress then has authority to do what Congress has authority to do, and the president has authority. But for the president to say, well, it's that darn IRS, we're going to pass legislation, we're going to push legislation through that stops the IRS from doing this. You don't have to do that. You're in charge of the IRS. If they're being unlawful, throw them in jail, prosecute them. And there have been plenty of times where many of them have acted unlawfully. That's true. Well, question 230. Catechism of our Constitution. Suppose any of the officers whom the president has appointed by the consent of the Senate should die or resign his office. Well, the Senate is not sitting. Let's say the Secretary of War or the Secretary of the Treasury or the Secretary of State dies in office and we're about to go to war. Do we have to wait for the Senate to confirm somebody? They could take a long time. They sometimes do that. They'll just stonewall, try to appoint a Supreme Court justice, and the Senate of the United States will delay the investigation and not give consent. And so there's only, instead of 9 justices, there's only 8. That's happened. What can be done? Answer. The president may appoint another person in his place who shall hold the office till the end, or till the Senate makes a confirmation, so the office doesn't stay vacant. Remember, the Secretary of War, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Treasury, and the Secretary of State, those are indispensable parts of our government. And President of the United States needs to have somebody in place. In the military, they call such a man like that an executive officer. Executive officer. See, in military units, there's the commanding officer, the old man himself. And then under him is appointed an executive officer. And the only responsibility of the executive order is to see to it that every order that the commanding officer gives is carried out. That's his job. The commanding officer is not given the job of making sure the orders are carried out. His job is just to give them, to be thinking about what needs to be done, give orders. And then the executive officer is to see to it that each of the men under him execute those orders all the way down to the seaman deuce and the private soldier. That's his job. And the commanding officer is to let him handle it. Well, that's the way the President of the United States is. He is to give orders to the Secretary of War, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of State, Secretary of the Navy, and not worry about whether or not his orders are executed. They are to be faithful and loyal to seeing those orders are executed. Then he can be freed up to do all the things he has to do and be, watch this, to be above all of the indignities that may occur below, to be above and stay above the dignity of the office of the President of the United States, to stay above all of the indignities, the infighting, the scandals that are below. Yes, very important. He's the head of state for the short time he's there. This is a part of the common law tradition too. The King of England or the Queen of England, part of our common law tradition, are the keepers of the dignity, the keepers of the dignity of the country. You got low class, dirty, sex perverts in office, as we have had in the presidency: Clinton, Obama, Biden. If they aren't like that, they're promoting those things. Orgies in the White House, yes, all of those things have happened in spades. When I was running for office, Clinton was in office. Orgies were the normal thing. I mean, orgies. Read the testimonies of those that were working security in the White House. When that happens, that's the President of the United States as head of state, the keeper of the dignity of our country. That's him not doing his most fundamental job. He is to be held above the scandalous things that go on below, to stay out of it. And of course, the other side, the other party, will continually try to drag him into it. The Democrats try to drag Reagan into scandals all over the world. The Democrats tried to drag Trump into scandals. We'll say, well, but didn't the Republicans try to do that? No. When the Democrats were in office? No, not necessarily. They didn't care. The Democrats don't care. They are scandalous. To them, that's a mark of what is admirable. Again, I'm not just shooting off opinions. I've seen this, and I know who they are. They take pride in their perversion. The more perverse they are in sex and money and liquor and booze and drugs, the more they are an example to those that follow them. That's what the Democratic Party has become. Is it in the Republican Party? Oh, yeah, it's there. It's there. But at least, watch this. Here's the difference. The Republican Party tries to subdue it and keep it under wraps They try to keep up appearances. The other side doesn't even try to keep up appearances. They don't care. They want the whole world to be as sexually and economically perverted as they are. That's what they promote. Friends, there's only two choices in life: the law of the land and the law of the city. You don't have any other choice. Neutrality is not an option in God's world. Neutrality is not an option in God's world. Listen to me. Are you willing to believe what the world tells you? Are you willing to believe what Jesus Christ tells you? The record of what he said. And yes, it is reliable, the most reliable record of an historic events of a man available to mankind with the gospel records. But Jesus Christ put it this way: he who is not for me is what? Some of you are saying it. Against me. Against me. Try to clean up my English a little and not talk like they talk in the Wabash Valley. This is Brent Allen Winters. We're going to begin with, well, let me do one more question. Question 231. Question: what are the duties of the president according to our Constitution of the United States? Answer: he must from time to time give information to Congress of the state of the United States. That's one of his duties. He must from time to time give information to Congress of the state of the United States. Now, by custom, this has come to be called the State of the Union address, but there have been a lot of presidents that have not done it that way. A lot of presidents, as a matter of fact, I think it started this way with Washington, but I won't swear to that. But some presidents have just written up a report to the State of the Union, sent it to Congress, and copies were passed out among every person. Now, if you notice the State of the Union address now, because of television and political policy, State of the Union addresses now are just a time of a FaceTime, be seen on TV, and promote your policies. It's showtime. It's show and tell is what it is. It has become exceedingly undignified. I would rather at this point that the president just send a written report to Congress and on the State of the Union, as many presidents have done, because it's a circus now. That's the word I was searching for. It is nothing but a promotional circus. It's distasteful to me. People trying to make statements on television by the way they dress, like all the witches put on, what they wear, white or black. I don't remember what it was. Who cares? They certainly weren't virgins, but if they were wearing white, that was silly. If they were wearing black, they looked like witches. It's just all showtime. It's a circus, a three-ring circus. Pelosi, this is undignified. This is why I say it's not good. This is why cameras are not allowed into courtrooms during trials, many trials. Why? Pelosi, back, she gets the State of the Union address, a copy of what the president's going to say, holds it up so the camera can see it, and rips it in two. Now, is that childish? Or is that childish? What? How infantile, how stupid, how... You talk about a silly ditz of a girl. It's undignified. That should stop. I show that kind of disrespect to the office of the President of the United States, and I know men who have been arrested for doing that back in the days when Nixon was in office and prosecuted by the State Department, tried to send them to jail. Should that be? Well, it depends on how far you go, but that shouldn't be allowed. And it's a matter of, not a matter of laws, as much a matter of just personal dignity. Nancy Pelosi had no sense of personal dignity. If she did, she wouldn't have said and did what she did. Brent Allen Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com, coming at you from the remote hinterlands of the Wabash River Valley, where the hogs, the frogs, and the dogs keep up a racket all night long.